Hi, everyone. I'm State Representative J.D. Scholten. I'm here in Sioux City, Iowa. I represent the western part of Sioux City. To give kind of folks perspective, well, first, Sioux City is where Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota all meet. So during COVID, that was pretty interesting to see the three states. But to put things in perspective, as a Democrat here in Western Iowa, the closest elected Democrat in the state south of me is an hour and a half, and to the east, it's 3 hours. And so I kind of know what it's like to be a Democratic legislator in an increasingly Republican controlled state, or as I also like to say, that I know what it's like to be a blueberry in a bowl of tomato soup. So with this, I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have a great presentation here or discussion about to happen. To basically explore the gap in the policy between the red states and the blue states. And we're seeing increasingly, especially here in Iowa, we're envious of our neighbors up north in Minnesota. But I'll first introduce some of these folks, and then we'll open up for a discussion. So first, I have Representative Josh Boschee, is the Assistant Minority Leader in the North Dakota House of Representatives. Josh was first elected in 2012, unseating a long-term Republican incumbent, and was the first openly gay politician elected in North Dakota's history. Josh has risen through the ranks in leadership and has previously served as the Minority Leader. Welcome, Josh. Next up is Representative Anthony Daniels. He is a one of my fellow One Country board members, and has served as the Minority Leader in the Alabama House of Representatives since 2017. Next up, we have via phone, we have Representative Ashton Clemmons. She's also one of the One Country board members and is serving in her second term in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Ashton has been a leader on education issues, as well as voting rights, criminal justice reform, and environmental issues. Next up is my colleague, Representative Adam Zabner. We're in the Iowa House of Representatives together. Adam was elected in 2022 and is the youngest member of the Iowa House in Iowa's history. Is that true?
Not in Iowa's history, but the current youngest member.
Well, he's one of the youngest ever to be elected. And Adam is a child of immigrants and has worked to make Iowa a more open and inclusive place. And we will be joined by Senator Grant Hauschild. He was first elected in 2022. He has won and flipped control, or his win helped flip control of the Minnesota Senate, creating a legislative trifecta for Democrats. And Grant has shown a tremendous amount of leadership in helping to advance the Democratic legislative agenda while fighting to ensure the rural and extraction-based economy of his district has not been left behind. So first of all, thank you all for joining us at the summit. Now, let's turn to some questions. And for those of you in the audience, we'll be taking questions only through the Q&A window, and questions submitted through the chat will not be answered. So make sure that if you do have a question, put it in the Q&A window. So first up, let's start on a positive note. What's a personal accomplishment from your state's legislative session that you're proud of? And we'll start with Representative Boschee.
Well, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be a part of this wonderful panel. Coming out of North Dakota, we made national headlines a lot more than we would have liked to this session. But in terms of something that I'm proud of, I introduced legislation to do a pilot project related to pay for success or outcomes-based funding, specifically within human services and education. I introduced it as the minority leader, thinking that none of my bills are going to pass, that it'll get turned into a study if I'm lucky, and we can have people look at the idea in the interim. Unfortunately, it got legs. And so we have a $2.5 million pilot program that we will be working with the Department of Health and Human Services. It sounds like we're going to be focusing on how do we expand and evaluate nurse family home visits for preborn through 5-year-olds in rural North Dakota and tribal communities. So excited to see that advance and look at a way that we can continue to try to evaluate how we deliver services to North Dakotans and make sure we're investing in the best delivery of services.
Fantastic. And Representative Daniels, what you got happening down in Alabama?
Well, first of all, thank you, JD, for moderating this. It's certainly an honor to be on a panel with such esteemed guests from across the country. And also thanks to the vision and leadership of Senator Heidi Heitkamp for putting this group together and really helping those of us that are in places that are very dark, but with the help from one country and their staff, I think we're in a much better place. There's a couple pieces of legislation I want to kind of briefly talk about. Yesterday, last week, I passed a piece of legislation, the first of its kind in the country, eliminating the state income taxes on overtime pay. So a person that works over 40 hours, any hour at the 40th hour, starting January, the state of Alabama has a 5% tax rate for income tax rate. And so those individuals that are working overtime, the state of Alabama, with this piece of legislation, we've eliminated the tax on overtime, and it goes back to the employee. What this does is long-term, it'll increase the participation rate, but it'll also give employers an opportunity to use the existing workforce. When I drive around the state of Alabama, whether it's the southern tip all the way to the northern tip, eastern or western, you see now hiring signs. And so what that does is it has a significant direct impact and indirect impact on the supply chain issue. And so we believe with the existing workforce that are already prepared, have been trained, being able to work additional hours, this piece of legislation would encourage them to work overtime. This will provide more funding for working families, but it'll also help control some of the costs and have companies to be at or ahead of their production schedule, which will drive down costs, whether it's retail or grocery stores or products in general. The other piece of legislation that I'm also proud of is the part of the governor's game plan package. I carried this piece of legislation to the finish line the first couple of weeks of session. What it does is it gives an opportunity for us to provide incentives for small businesses to move to Alabama. Existing small businesses within the state of Alabama right now, the Department of Commerce has focused a lot of its attention on the large companies and large corporations coming into the state recruitment. But they had within one of their departments where they did the accelerator program. Well, sometimes programs like that get lost because of the emphasis on large projects. And so right now, this board that I'm on, this public-private partnership, will be the vehicle that we attract and recruit and retain small businesses in the state of Alabama, starting with the accelerator program for executives, but also any company that resides in Alabama, their executives, at least 3 of their executives, and 75% of their workforce or more will be able to get access to an STTR and SBIR grant, with its technology transfer and research and development grant, up to $250,000 per small business. This is a grant for small businesses to help them through that particular process, and to really show that we're slowly becoming, aggressively becoming a state to attract and want to house small businesses all across the state of Alabama. So those are 2 pieces of legislation that I've sponsored that I've seen go across the finish line this session in a super minority.
That's fantastic. Both those ideas I absolutely love, and so I'm going to pick your brain after this to let you see how you did it. So thank you. Next up, I'm going to reach out to Ashton, Representative Ashton Clemmons, on the phone with us. And how about you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you in the One Country family, and thanks to everyone who's participating. I am similar to Rep. Boschee, if I'm sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly. I am really excited because I just got a call from our governor's office today that we'll be doing a bill signing on Monday for a bill that is going to lead to reforms in our childcare licensing that will make it really important reforms. And the bill is a compromise between our Health and Human Services, our childcare industry. Everyone knows that there needs to be reform, and this is going to set up a group that will create those reforms to bring back to us in short session. So, as many on this call, being able to make any progress in some of our states can be a challenge. So it's exciting to work in early childhood in particular, because I do think it's something we see people coming together on. And we've seen a significant increase and businesses advocating for the early child care system in our state as critical to the current workforce as well. So I'm going to say that's my most exciting thing so far for the session.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to go to Representative Zabner, and then we'll go to the senator from Minnesota here shortly. So, Adam?
Thanks, JD. It's really cool to be here. I was a One Country Project intern not too long ago, so cool to be back as a legislator. And, one thing that I'm really passionate about is the opioid epidemic. It's something that has impacted my family and something I really came in wanting to work on. And so this year I introduced legislation to legalize fentanyl test strips, which allow people to make sure that substances don't contain fentanyl or aren't laced with fentanyl. And we didn't get it over the finish line, but it was really exciting to work on, to have the conversations. And when we ended up introducing it as an amendment on the floor, we did get 4 Republicans to vote for it. And so it's an issue I want to continue working on. And knowing as a freshman, when you show up with a new idea, it doesn't necessarily get done the first year, but getting bipartisan support is really a great step to making sure that we can keep working on this.
Fantastic. And so welcome, Senator Hauschild. So we were all talking about accomplishments that we had, but we're all in the minority. So, and we're just going to name a couple. So we don't want you to go through the huge long list that you guys are all doing and crushing it up in Minnesota. But if you have a couple that you personally worked on or something that's passionate to you, please let us know.
Well, thanks a lot, JD, for having me. And my apologies for being late. I'm actually driving. So I represent the Arrowhead region of Minnesota, which is the entire northeastern part of the state, the Arrowhead along Lake Superior and the Iron Range. So I'm driving up the North Shore between school groundbreakings. We got some incredible education funding, not only for construction projects, but also increasing to historic levels education funding and sparsity aid for our rural schools. So that was something that I was really proud about, and going to these groundbreakings is an important part of that. The thing that I'm really focused on, and I think Governor Walz is really focused on, is making Minnesota the best place to raise a family, trying to recruit people to live and play and work in Minnesota. And the ways that we do that, in my mind, there's a lot of different ways, but the 3 ways I was really focused on it was investing in the things that employers and families really need in rural Minnesota. I represent one of the most isolated and rural districts, not only as a Democrat, but really among the entire legislature along the Canadian border. So rural broadband, we invested $100 million in rural broadband to go that last mile for a lot of our communities. Housing, we invested $1 billion in housing, and of that, $44 million is for workforce housing in greater Minnesota specifically, which is going to be a critical piece. Housing is nearly impossible to come by here along the North Shore. And so when employers are thinking about where they want to locate, it's really hard to do that if you don't have the housing for the employees that they may want to recruit. And then lastly, we want our families to be able to raise their kids here. And so I really focused on childcare and child tax credits, which is something the governor was really passionate about. We had $1 billion bill that I introduced for childcare that would have provided up to $12,000 for families to afford childcare costs. And the governor had his child tax credit bill, which provides for low-income families and middle-income families up to $90,000, a credit similar to the federal program that Biden introduced to reduce poverty, they're estimating by 33% in Minnesota. And so really, really exciting stuff. Of course, as you said, there's other things, but those are really the ones at a fundamental level to support families that I was really excited to work on.
Again, very jealous. My folks live up there, and my sister's up there, and during the summer I play town team baseball up in Minnesota. So I've been keeping a close eye on what y'all are doing. So keep up the great work. Second question here. And this is for the Republican folks, and then we'll get back to the senator on the next question. But states with Republican trifectas have spent the past year passing restrictive abortion bans, book bans, laws vilifying transgender youth. Are you concerned that this will make the states unwelcoming places and lead to population losses as families relocate to areas that are more accepting? And we'll start with Representative Boschee.
Yeah, great question. And I think absolutely. I'm sitting here smiling at my friend Grant Hauschild, who we've worked on campaigns together, and to see him run and put in a good race and win up in Greater Minnesota, and then being a deciding vote in a progressive trifecta, I think is exciting, because my district in my community that I represent is on the border of Minnesota, North Dakota, and I sell real estate the year and a half that we aren't in Bismarck, and unfortunately, maybe fortunately, I make good money as a real estate agent moving people back and forth across the border. And I can tell you right now, there are people, again, who are thinking they moved to North Dakota because things got great nationwide, lower taxes in North Dakota. Now they want to move back to Moorhead because of the access to resources, again, whether it's the access to childcare benefits, whether it's the access to housing supports, legalizing adult use cannabis, a variety of reasons we're seeing people move over there for the opportunity. And the question was framed about restrictions, and that's, I think, the dichotomy we have to show is that it's, do you want to live in a state and a community where you're provided opportunity, or do you want to live in a state and a community where you're having opportunities taken away from you? And, in a place like North Dakota, my first day of this last session in January, a senator who I respect greatly out of Williston, which is an oil country in northwestern North Dakota, made the comment that there is not a psychiatrist west of Highway 83, which essentially is the dividing highway between the east and the west of North Dakota. That stuck with me every day, because then I kept thinking, how the hell do the people in at least half of the landmass of our state receive the services they need? Fast forward to these anti-trans bills, specifically trans healthcare bills that we had to live through this last session. And we have doctors and physicians getting up, and we only have 2 pediatric endocrinologists in the entire state. They're both based in Fargo, which is the eastern part of the state. And those doctors are saying, what happens if we leave? Because yes, our patient population, we serve transgender patients, and that is less than 1% of our patient population, they testified. But what about your kids with type 1? What about people who have kidney failure that we are serving and providing support to throughout the nation? If we leave and you can't recruit new endocrinologists, specifically pediatric endocrinologists, that impacts everybody. We already know access to rural health care is a problem. Fortunately, we are a Medicaid expansion state. We were the first Republican-led state to expand Medicaid. But that's because we had reasonable Republicans who were investing in their own communities, and we're losing those folks now, and they're being replaced by these extreme ideologues who aren't interested in governing, but want to continue to attack people for who they are and how they live. And so, yes, I think it makes North Dakota less attractive. I think it makes places like Minnesota or Michigan or Colorado, Illinois more attractive, because they are actually advocating for the issues that impact families and people. And as Senator Hauschild said, they're able to leave with a lot of wins that are going to directly impact their community and probably strengthen their economy because of it.
Yeah. And talking about rural healthcare, I know Representative Daniels has been a leader of that down in Alabama. And do you want to talk a little bit about whether Alabama is a place that's more welcoming or not because of what's happening in the legislature?
Well, I think I have kind of mixed emotions about that. I do think that for me, when I go out to other states, which I travel quite a bit, I'm trying to recruit folks to Alabama because all of our major cities are Democratically leaning, with no infrastructure, with no party infrastructure, and we're still naturally Democratically leaning. So you're talking about Huntsville, Alabama, which is one of the best places to live in America. But we've moved from 32% Democrat to about 46 in the presidential race and 48 in the governor's race. Birmingham is heavily Democratic. Montgomery, heavily Democratic. Mobile is on the edges where they have a significant population of individuals that are considered rare and sporadic voters. And if they are organized, they would be a majority Democratic county as well. And we have a lot of our rural areas that are majority Democrat, some of our other areas where they're high-tech industry and all that. And so for me, I do think that that's an issue for some, but when you get to Alabama, you fall in love with it. Despite our past, our dark past. That's why I've been so much on the front lines of working across the aisle on creating the infrastructure so that we can attract more businesses that require terminal degrees. And we know that populations and individuals with terminal degrees are more or less likely to be on the other side. And so instead of writing off the state and some of the policies that we passed, I'm trying to recruit more people of like minds here so that we can move the needle in 10 years, so that we can move the needle in 4 years. And so I think that for me, we're seeing an increase because of the type of tech jobs that we're having, like Space Command, or I guess you see we're fighting over that right now. But those are the things that are actually going to make our state change for the good, and that's why I'm embracing that. I will tell you that some of the issues and the barriers it's kind of slowed down. I was able to stop the CRT from passing this year. I was able to stop penalizing absentee voting this year. And so I think now I've been tying my remarks to our image and our ability to recruit and retain, especially retaining the students that are at our flagship institutions in the state. And I think they're starting to see some movement there. And so I think it's sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah, that's fantastic perspective. I'll go to Representative Zabner, and then I'll go back to Ashton if you're available.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It reminds me of a conversation I had a couple years ago when I was running with a guy who runs a startup here in Johnson County. And he straight up told me, when he gets to 100 people and he needs 20 coders, his company is going to have to leave Iowa, because that is the limit of what he can hire here. And I'm thinking to myself, we have 30,000 undergrads here in our county, and computer science is one of the most popular majors. But every time I go to campus and I talk to groups of students, the first question I ask is, are you planning to stay in Iowa after graduation? And overwhelmingly, the answer is no. I talk to students who are studying education, and they say, I can go up to Minnesota, I can make better money, they're not going to penalize me. You're not going to have state leadership saying that I'm trying to, do horrible things to children, and I'm actually going to be rewarded for my work. And so I think it's a huge problem. And the most difficult part of this job, the most difficult day of the first session was a meeting organized here in Johnson County right after we did some of those anti-trans bills with a couple organizations that work with trans youth. And it was these young people and their parents, and listening to parents, literally working out the logistics of how they're going to leave the state. And we don't have the luxury to give people up, especially talented people here in Iowa.
Yeah, I know two families personally that have either moved to Minnesota or in the process of moving to Minnesota, so their kids can have a regular high school experience. Representative Clemmons.
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble getting on the first time, but so I think North Carolina is in an interesting transition. We are number one state in the country for business and have had extreme economic development and business growth in the past several years. And we have just recently moved into being in the super minority in both chambers. And so where we have been fairly moderate on most of the social issues, we have seen in the past couple of months significant far steps to the right. And the debate now is between far right and far right in some ways. And so I think there are many business leaders across North Carolina who are very concerned about the impact of some of the more social and cultural warfare issues that are being chosen to be and taken up in the North Carolina General Assembly, and what the impact will be as we've had such good growth, and we want to continue that growth. But I do think we're concerned about companies, particularly the bigger and more progressive growing companies in our country being impacted and looking at our state moving forward. So I think we're kind of living through what the impact of that will be in North Carolina.
Interesting. We'll be following. So, and this kind of the flip side to this is for Senator Hauschild. So with Democratic trifectas have spent this year passing comprehensive legislation to expand social programs. These programs will affect everyone in the state, but were passed by narrow margins on partisan votes. Do you have any concern about backlash from the more conservative parts of your state, or what messaging steps are you taking to explain that legislation and build public support for it?
Yeah, thanks for the question, JD. I agree. It's a great one. And the way I think about it is the people that have come to me with concerns about the social issues, 9 times out of 10, they are wrongfully informed about what has passed. The two examples that I give are abortion and transgender rights that we have passed in Minnesota. On abortion, of course, there's language like we're going to allow abortions for born alive children and abortions up to birth. That is just fundamentally, my wife's an advanced practitioner. I work for a hospital. We know for a fact that abortions after 24 weeks do not happen unless the life of the mother or circumstances are that are extremely rare. And so this phrasing of the way that we passed that law is wrong. Not only that, but we codified existing Minnesota law based on judge decisions. And so no abortion laws actually changed in Minnesota. What we did is, in fact, codified that language so that it's protected if our trifecta were to ever reverse and go into Republican hands, and terrible things could happen on women's right to choose. So really, it was a defensive move on our part proactively. When it comes to the transgender protections that we passed, there are terrible, things said about gender mutilation in children and things like that, which we know are not happening in Minnesota. When it comes to that, if there are anything like that, it's after 18 years of age when a person makes those decisions. And so, it's usually just correcting folks. What I would say in terms of backlash in our state, I am more thinking about the economic issues. We still tax Social Security in Minnesota, and so one of my campaign promises was to work to eliminate that tax. We rely on e-pull tabs and pull tabs for a lot of our VFWs, our YMCAs, our kids' sports teams, and we made a change to those because of tribal sovereignty rights for gambling. And usually when people come to me with those issues, at first, I was very concerned about the backlash that might happen because we passed Social Security tax relief for 85% of Minnesota seniors. And we provided over 30 million of tax relief to these charities for pull tabs. And what I was getting wrong in my head was following the Republican language and being defensive rather than selling the fact that we got Social Security tax relief for 85% of seniors, something that Republicans have been promising for decades in Minnesota. The e-poll tabs, providing $30 million of the $60 million in profit, 50% of their earnings, we gave them tax relief. And so, it's about sending the message of the accomplishments you're making economically rather than being defensive about the Republican talking points. And that's something that I really have been taking advantage of since the session is over, is what is the big relief that we provided folks and what are the economic deliverables for our region?
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Representative Zabner, I'll start you on this next question. In Republican-controlled states, we've seen laws passed, statewide legislation to prevent communities from implementing local ordinances that would be more progressive than the legislature would like. So, and the other side tends to be, they used to say they were the party of local control. What have you seen here in Iowa that, and what would impact Iowa City that we did down in Des Moines?
Yeah, I swear for years they've had someone sitting in the Iowa City Council meetings, maybe at the Johnson County Board of Supervisors, because they seem to be right on top of everything. Johnson County, as the most probably progressive county in the state, tries to do. A couple of years ago, there was the big issue of Johnson County implementing a minimum wage and the state coming back and taking away the ability of counties to do that. We've seen that with a couple other issues, and they're just definitely not the party of local control in Iowa at this point. I think that and I'm sure you've experienced this too when you have conversations with other legislators. It's really whatever goes in my community should be everywhere. To the point where at one point there was a proposal from the governor that if one community bans a book, every community should have to. And of course, for me, there's a reason we have school board elections, and there's a reason that the Iowa City Community School District School Board looks a little different than it might look like in your neck of the woods, and I think that's a good thing. And so I've fought for local control. This year, there were a couple of big issues around stormwater runoff and taking away the ability of local governments to protect their communities from flooding. Those ended up not passing, which was really great, but doesn't seem to be a whole lot of commitment to local control from conservatives in Iowa these days.
Yeah, we had an interesting. We had 3 counties here in Western Iowa with the county board of supervisors and the elected legislatures all meeting. I was the one Democrat in a room of 20 elected officials. And I kept on siding with the local folks saying, hey, listen, I didn't vote for this crap. So
they even tried to change how we elect our supervisors in Johnson County because they thought we had too many Democrats. So
we're dealing with that here in Woodbury as well. But on the other side, reverse side, we'll go to Representative Boschee and then Ashton after you or after that.
No, I think this is a great conversation or question because, as we say up here now, Republicans say they're for local control, but that's really just to control the locals. And it's embarrassing the amount, we're an energy rich state. We're all the above. And so we love to point our finger and yell at the federal government for their overreach. But then we turn around and look down and tell counties and cities and school boards and park boards what they can and can't do all the time. And unfortunately, that has continued to be eroded at here, like other rural red states, even so much as the voters of the city of Fargo, 60% of them overwhelmingly passed approval voting. And we've had 2 city elections since then, in which approval voting has been used, and then the legislature tried to take that away. The unique thing we have in North Dakota with our trifecta is that we actually have a Republican governor who this morning just announced for president, but he actually has vetoed a number of their bills that were overreach. And so that we were able to work with, sustain a number of those along with working with the Republicans. That being said, I think this is an important part of, as progressives and as people who are left of center, how do we make sure that we are building a base at the city, local, and county level? What are we doing in our organizations to make sure that we can elect people who not only are going to be great public servants and advocate for their communities, but are going to push back against state overreach? That is my biggest disappointment I have in my cities and counties in North Dakota is they love to behind the scenes complain about the overreach of our legislature, but then will not stand up. And they have the collective power. And I've told our mayor here in Fargo, you have the ability to raise 150,000 people's awareness about what's happening and how this impacts their daily lives. And you need to do more of that. And so that's, our state party and our partner organizations, that's where a lot of our conversations are now is there's only a couple legislative districts we have a fighting chance in this next election, but we do have tons of opportunities at school board and local elections to fill the seats and make sure we're building a base so that as the pendulum comes back, and when North Dakotans realize that this mega extremism is too much, that they'll have good alternatives to vote for.
That's fantastic. Representative Clemmons. Yes, I actually think this is one of the areas that has been most impactful as we moved into a superminority in North Carolina. We see legislators passing bills to supersede local government where the full Republican school board or county commission is writing to the legislature not supporting the bill, and the legislator is still running the bill, to the point that we had one legislator who ran a bill to choose a specific curriculum for the school system that he represents overruling an entire Republican school board. And so, I think as we think about the balance between local and state, but also just good government in general, it is really concerning to me, almost a feeling of omnipotence that happens or is pervading our General Assembly, that I think for sure they are passing things to supersede what's happening in more Democratic counties, but they're actually doing that, what surprised me even more, over the objection of purely Republican local boards as well. So we have seen actually half the bills that have been passed this session have been local bills, which is not normal. And so I definitely think that's a big push of our current leadership in the General Assembly.
Oh, that's interesting. Representative Daniels.
So we saw some of these that a lot of it predates me, where when the Republicans took over in 2010. Before 2010, believe it or not, folks, Alabama was a majority Democratic state in both houses and 3 constitutional offices. And so following the 2010 election, there were a lot of policies targeting local government. In Alabama, we have home rule. And so, you don't have home rule. I'm sorry, we don't have home rule so every local municipality or county government, every ordinance that they want to pass that have, whether it's taxes or even salaries, have to go through the legislature. But they also have the ability to use their local delegation to pass local pieces of legislation for their counties and their communities. And a lot of times, folks try to be team players when it comes to that and really honoring some of that. And so for us, I think that some of our local delegations have used the tool that they have. We study the rules, whether it's the rules for the House and the House floor, also the rules as it relates to local legislation. And so our Mobile County counterparts, they were always honored, where a local delegation chair would be a co-chair. It will be a Democrat 2 years, a Republican 2 years. We have 4-year terms. And this particular last session, the Republicans decided that they wanted it all. They wanted to be the chair and the vice chair. And so there left no room for a Democrat. So what that local delegation did, they threatened to kill every piece of legislation. And so local Mobile County has not passed one piece of local legislation up until this point in the entire session. So utilizing the tools at your disposal. The other piece is we saw a bill targeting Jefferson County and their water board. Of course, their water board has had tremendous, been in the media a lot from its management and other things. There was a change back in 2015, I think, to their water board and the folks that serve on that water board, because there are some municipalities that didn't have representation on that water board. And so now, because of some of the things that have been happening, they tried to pass legislation this year. So what we decided to do was threaten to shut the entire legislature down and filibuster every day on every calendar. And so that piece of legislation never came up. And so we were very happy. We know that they were passing a statewide piece of legislation to go around the local legislative process. And so I had all of our colleagues in both the House and the Senate to threaten filibustering the entire session if that piece of legislation came up. And so it never came up. And so there are tools that you have at your disposal that you're able to use. But I'm fortunate to have right now the Speaker of the House and our personal friends outside of this. We came in together in 2014. And so this has been really the best session for me. Because we're able to get things worked out before we get to the House floor. Even bills that we have an issue with, we have a chief of staff and a team and support from our friends here at OCP to really help us think through that process, because we've never seen these plays before. The game is sometimes the game is moving really fast, and you've never seen it at this level. And so having people that have done this before to help us navigate through that is really how we've been able to really control negative pieces of legislation that had impact on the local level. And then we have other tools that we use. And so it has not been that much of an issue at this particular point, but they did it it predated me on a lot of the pieces of legislation, but right now, that is, and the way I work is the person that brings that legislation to go after that community. Every piece of legislation for the remainder of my career in the legislature, we're going to filibuster their bills. So I don't play around.
Nice. We talked a lot about local control here. Here in the state of Iowa, they passed a realignment bill, and previous sessions they limited the Attorney General's office because we had AG Tom Miller, who's been there as long as I've been alive, to limit his power once they got the trifecta. Now the realignment bill, they gave the AG more power, and then they had a standalone bill to take away power from our one Democratic state auditor, or the statewide person, and that was their state auditor. But Representative Zabner worked on the realignment bill. Do you want to talk just a little bit about that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think this is another example of sort of that tension that I think we've all been talking about. Like, we've had some pretty outspoken candidates for county attorney, Democratic candidates for county attorney here in the state of Iowa, talking about sort of changing in terms of what they're going to choose to prosecute with drug cases, whether or not they'd be willing to enforce an abortion ban in the state of Iowa. And so as part of this sort of big realignment bill, which I had the opportunity to work on, they gave Attorney General Brenna Bird the power to now go into any county and prosecute any case without asking the county attorney's permission. So previously, sometimes in a small county, if there's a murder, the county attorney would ask the state AG to come in because they just don't have the resources. But now, hypothetically, the state AG can come in and prosecute whatever she wants. And so it was another interesting case because the head of the Association of County Attorneys here in Iowa is actually a rural Republican. And she was very outspoken against this. She gave me a letter, which I read on the floor, talking about how it took away her prosecutorial discretion, about how it would impact her work in Calhoun County, Iowa. And despite that, the bill obviously passed. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, especially if Republicans, we have an upcoming Supreme Court case here in Iowa. But depending on what happens with abortion law here in Iowa, I think that is going to be a big issue.
Do you want to talk about your amendment?
Oh, well, I had a couple. Yeah,
the funny one.
This turned into a contentious fight, but really our thesis was that the governor was calling this a realignment, and it was really a consolidation of power to herself. And whether it's allowing to set her cabinet secretaries' salaries without asking the legislature, whether it's being able to hire and fire people at will, and the word that was in the bill over and over again was the pleasure of the governor. And so I did have an amendment that would have changed the Iowa state sign to "We serve at the pleasure of the governor." You got to have some fun sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, I needed that. Those were some dark hours. So next question, we'll go to Senator Hauschild here. And so gun control, and we're talking about rural issues here, and gun control is one of the hot button issues around the country, but is being addressed in significantly different ways. Could you share a little bit about what has done to expand or loosen gun regulations in your state?
Yeah, this was probably the most difficult issue for me in particular, given my district. As I mentioned, I represent one of the most isolated rural districts in the state. But not only that, but a district that has a culture of gun ownership that's probably one of the highest per capita in the state, with the forests and the hunting lands up here. So what I did, and the approach that I took was to be honest with my constituents and stakeholders, to say, I don't know what the answer is, and I need to have thoughtful conversations with stakeholders on all sides of the issue. So I had sat down with all 5 of my county sheriffs. I sat down with Moms Demand Action and for I sat down with, I did town halls with constituents in the more rural parts of my district. And then I had conversations with police departments and police chiefs and various individuals. And through those conversations, it became very clear that, outlawing guns, semi-automatics, and in particular, a storage law, which of all things seems like it would be slightly more non-controversial, actually was the most controversial in my district, because what it would have done is required individuals in their homes to store ammo and guns separately. And there really is this feeling of both self-defense, but also bears, wolves, and other issues in the more rural parts of my district, where having ammo stored separately was just seen as really a non-starter. And so I quickly came out against those bills. But then there were two really, really critical bills that I thought could make a difference in stopping a school shooting and stopping mass shooting outcomes in our state. And that was the red flag law and the background check extension for private sales. Really, the thing that impacted me most was a conversation I had with one of my most rural county sheriffs, who told me the story of a family that came to him and said that they had a family member that was a danger to them and others. Everybody in this rural community knew that this individual was a potential threat and had substance abuse issues. The sheriff communicated to the family that they're given the tools that he had, he did not have the ability to do anything about it. So when the individual was seeking substance abuse counseling, the family went back to the sheriff and said, look, because you can't help us, we want to proactively inform you that because our loved one is out of his home, we are going to go in and get the guns ourselves. What ended up happening is that individual ended up charging the family, and the sheriff had to charge them with burglary. That is not the way this should work. And this is a rural sheriff. This is a rural community. And so that story helps solidify in my mind that the common sense way of doing this is to give the tools to our law enforcement they need to get guns out of the hands that could potentially harm families and harm children. And so we passed that law. We gave some more local control, to the point about the previous conversation. The law was originally written where an individual could seek to take guns away from a loved one from any judge in the state. So they could be down in the Twin Cities, for instance, seek a judge down there to take away guns up in Coochin County in my district. I made sure that it was a local judge that had to make that decision. I think that was the appropriate way to go about it. And I changed the law to make sure that law enforcement was involved in the legal process from the start, rather than just a judge contacting the sheriff and saying, hey, we did this court proceeding, you weren't a part of it, you know nothing about this, but go take these guns. Because sheriffs and police often have a lot of information about past circumstances that are really important to be part of those legal proceedings, and I wanted them to be involved. So we passed those two bills. I will say the outreach since then has been remarkably positive. Certainly, there are those that are upset by it, and it could cost me a reelect. But I think at the end of the day, we have reached a threshold in America where kids are getting shot on a weekly or monthly basis, and people feel like something has to happen. Even the most conservative people that I talk to have said to me that something needs to happen, and these two laws seemed like the right way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Representative Clemmons?
Yes, I think gun control is something we in different parts of North Carolina are having to talk about differently in different ways. As a mom to 3 young children, our moms are angry that we continue to not solve this problem and that they are having to send their children to unsafe places and at the inaction that is happening. Unfortunately, in North Carolina, just 3 days after the Tennessee school shooting, they repealed the pistol permit in our state. So, and we are fighting tooth and nail to not go backwards, which is, a whole different conversation than what we should be doing proactively. But I think even in, in the South, I think there's a culture of certainly Second Amendment rights. And I think we can do that, and we can make our children more safe. And I think that's how we have to talk about it. And unfortunately, they're going the wrong direction in North Carolina.
How about Representative Boschee? What's happening in North Dakota?
Well, there was a number of expansion bills introduced this last session, but almost all of them were defeated or turned into one comprehensive study because we've actually passed everything that everyone's comfortable passing. So, I mean, we're an open carry state. There's constitutional carry. So people are able, except basically the Capitol and bars, and I believe universities are the last places. So the challenge is having the conversation. And as Representative Clemmons said, is, how do we have this in a way that people don't feel threatened, that it's not such an emotional conversation on all sides. And North Dakota, knock on my wood desk here, is as far as I know, is still the only state not to have a mass shooting. But we know every day that we don't have one, we get closer to a day that it's going to happen, unfortunately. And so, we had really thoughtful legislation before red flag laws were universally discussed. My seatmate, Representative Carla Rose Hansen, had introduced legislation. She had worked for months ahead of time, got law enforcement on board. She had the Senate Majority Leader on board, a lot of people on board, and then were blindsided by the outrage that came with it about this is, an unconstitutional taking and whatnot. So lost a lot of those reasonable Republican supports. So we can't even have the conversation about how can we do it responsibly, or what's the North Dakota way to solve this solution or to solve this problem. And so, like many of you, I think I'm at a loss because it's a conversation we want to continue to have, but it's not a conversation, we're on defense so much. And so to try to have proactive conversations in some of our communities is tough. And so certainly look to partnering again with One Country and other stakeholders. How can we do that reasonably?
Yeah. And Senator, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to, I kind of laid out what happened. I think in terms of messaging, one of the things that I did was I talked about my experience as a hunter and a gun owner myself, and growing up in a family that took me hunting at a young age, taught me hunter safety, and a conversation I had with my grandfather where he told me, you are holding a rifle that could take someone's life, and you have a responsibility as a gun owner to know how to properly handle this gun, store this gun, unload it, and clean it. And so the way that I talked about it during town halls and with sheriffs and others is we as gun owners have a responsibility to have the type of common sense laws in place to protect the citizens around us. And if there are individuals that are not in a mental state to have guns, it's our responsibility to ensure that our police and law enforcement have the tools that they need to ensure that those unresponsible gun owners do not have the guns. And when I would bring that up, even to folks with Second Amendment hats on and camo on, it seemed to probably not, they're not going to support me, but it at least got them to a place of neutrality and saying, I don't have an argument against that. Gun responsibility, gun ownership, being individuals that are responsible is language that I think works really well in rural and works with gun owners.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Representative Daniels.
Unfortunately, we passed one of the worst bills in history last year, permitless carry. We know that the data shows us that every state that passed permitless carry has had approximately 10% increase in homicides. And so we've been kind of using this particular issue to kind of dial back some of it, and really turning the phrase defund the police around on them. And using it with them because of the items that were the way the funding was being used from the sheriff's office that really dealt with the permits. And so we've been able to use that. And so it forced the other side to start introducing legislation to kind of chip away at parts of that law. especially those with that have been mentally ill. One of the loopholes that that's created a nightmare for all of us, is that the only individuals that are on that list are those that have been committed, are on the list of not being able to buy. But individuals that are deemed mentally ill from a doctor, or they're being medicated or not controlled, those individuals are not captured in the law. And so there's a loophole there. The other piece is being able to do something with the Glock switch. We had conversations about that. We've had a really tragic shootings that happen in the state, especially among young people. And so I suspect that this is something that we'll be kind of talking about throughout the summer to educate the public on what an actual Glock switch is and the impact that it has, as well as the mental health piece. But when it comes to the database, a lot of times there at the federal level, it capture those that are buying, from a federal law standpoint, capture those that are purchasing legally. But a person that do like a point sale, if I sell my gun, or someone, a license as a non-licensed dealer sell their gun to someone, it doesn't capture those individuals in the process. And so we're just trying to make certain that we tighten up some of the loopholes. But I would tell you that this legislation has been so detrimental, and we're seeing the increase in gun violence as a result of it.
Yeah, Representative Zabner, you want to talk about what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, we're also seeing an increase in gun violence in Iowa, as you know, and you walk into the Iowa State Capitol, there's a sign that says the only weapons allowed in this building are concealed handguns. And then you go through a metal detector to make sure that you don't have a knife on you. I mean, it's just crazy. There are armed people in the Capitol. Last year, we did a constitutional amendment on the ballot that passed with about 60% of the vote, maybe more, to enact strict scrutiny as a constitutional standard for gun rights, which makes it very, very difficult to do any kind of limit or gun safety measure here in Iowa. This year, Republicans actually introduced and passed a bill through the House that would have allowed guns on school grounds, at public universities and at public schools all over our state, in terms of in the parking lot. That was a really emotional moment for me, in terms of you're literally trying to get the guns closer to the schools. And a couple of my colleagues, including one who taught at a high school in Des Moines that experienced a school shooting last year, joined me after the bill passed. We read the list of every school shooting since Columbine, which, Columbine was about a month before I was born. So this is, a generational failure that has literally defined a lot of the politics of my entire lifetime. And for me, I think, Iowa is not going to ban guns, right? And I don't think that's the right solution either. But just to get us to admit that there's a problem that we actually have to solve in terms of gun violence in our state and nationally, I think is the first step. And thinking it through messaging that just gets folks to admit that there's a problem. No one wants to take away your guns, but what can we do proactively to keep your kids safe? Because it's horrifying. Like, I went on a rafting trip right after session ended. I didn't have my phone for a week. And I kept thinking, like, is there going to be a tragedy in my community and I'm not going to see it because I don't have my phone? Like, that's a crazy thought to have to think. And that shouldn't be what Americans are thinking about.
So it's clear that we're seeing this widening gap between legislative priorities in red states and blue states. What do you think that this gap tells us about the future of this country? And I'll start with Representative Boschee.
Well, I think, we'll see what the presidential headlines lead us into in this next election specifically. But, we're seeing the middle, independents, not participate anymore. We're the reasonable people, the people that are the decision makers in our elections, whether it is for school board or it's for the United States president, choosing not to participate because we are spending more time fighting about things that aren't priorities to them. And I say that loosely. I mean, that's a broad stroke. But again, I look at how excited and hard it was to sit in Bismarck and know that what St. Paul was doing or Ann Arbor was doing when they all of a sudden had their trifecta and were disciplined in saying, these are the priorities. We're going to listen to everybody. So, center left folks like Grant Hauschild, who was the one decision maker, was able to play a key role in representing his community and making sure that progress was still made on the issues that were important to Democrats and to progressives. And so, really what I'm just seeing, and I'm fearful of, in a state like North Dakota, where we have, for the longest time, we'd always carry our chip on our shoulder that we had some of the highest voter participation rates in the country. And we've seen that eroded. And part of that, I think, is twofold. A, independents and moderates are deciding not to participate. And two, because it is so slanted that Republicans have supermajority throughout North Dakota, and we know that folks are going to vote Republican at the top of the ticket, Democrats aren't showing up. They aren't showing up in those races where our legislative races, a handful of them are won within 100 votes. And I always have to remind my folks that 100 votes isn't just finding 100 new people. It's maybe just flipping 50 people's minds. And that's how the electoral math works. And so that's my concern. And I don't know what's going to bring us back as a country to unify us or to bring us to where we start focusing on finding solutions to the real issues facing our communities and our nation.
Yeah, there was a national article that was written after Senator Ernst here in Iowa has an annual event, and a bunch of the presidential candidates were there. And I mean, these are pretty partisan people going to this event, and the reporter asked them about what they thought about stuff, and they're like, nobody talked about healthcare. In which, I mean, when I ran for the 4th congressional district, almost every gas station had a donation box to help pay for somebody's Medicare costs, or a pancake breakfast, or a GoFundMe. So that goes exactly with what we're seeing here. Representative Clemmons, do you want to?
Yes, in North Carolina, we are, we have a Democratic governor, a Democratic attorney general, so we're really walking the line. And, I think what is happening at our state legislature is most hurting people, but it's on us to get people to know that and to vote based on that. So I think we are working on different ways to do that, but that's our challenge, is how do we keep Democrats and moderate folks in North Carolina who do not agree with the far extreme positions that are being taken, how do we make sure they know the impact of specific state legislative races on those decisions? And that's our task moving forward.
Senator, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really lucky in a lot of ways. I will say Minnesota has the highest turnout in the nation. So folks turn out. In my home community, 92% of residents turn out. So when I'm knocking doors, I know people are voting. And I think what Democrats need to try to do, and I realize it's difficult with Republican trifectas, but how do we encourage democracy in a post-Trump or future, sadly, Trump world where that is under threat? Because I think that's the more people that are engaged, the more people that are voting. I think that helps Democrats. I will also say, I know that this is talked about ad nauseum in the academics about politics, but the big sort is a real thing, and I've lived and breathed it. I ran for the state legislature in North Dakota the same year as Representative Boschee, and I lost. And at the end of the day, I made the difficult decision, to move to a state that aligned with my values, and then took a risk to run for a difficult seat. Those decisions, those micro decisions at a personal level, are happening all across our country. And we're seeing it further and further divide our states and divide our communities and our country. And figuring out how we do things like One Country is doing to bring democratic voices together is I think, a really important piece. There are organizations in my region, 100 Rural Women organization that is connecting rural women with each other and keeping those connections going despite they might be in different rural communities. How do we keep fostering those and using technology to do those kinds of things. I think that's really important. I will say, in terms of the different directions we're going as a state, while I voted for the most progressive agenda in maybe the history of our state of Minnesota, there are things where I aligned pretty heavily with Republicans. I come from a mining district. I align with Republicans on a lot of things related to mining, with permitting, the timber industry. And we as Democrats, I'm not saying everybody has to agree with every energy policy or environmental policy, and that we shouldn't address climate change. But what I am saying is we as Democrats have to make sure that we represent the industries and the jobs and the people and the families that rely on certain things. And so how we communicate those values and maybe cross the line, the partisan line, to maybe not always fall along the party is really, really critical if we ever want to get elected. The founder of One Country, Heidi Heitkamp, does this better than anybody, or did this better than anybody in the state of North Dakota, showcasing that she wasn't just a party line Democrat and that she, both culturally and policy-wise, aligned with what North Dakota, and that's something that we also need to do.
I'll head over to Representative Daniels. So to refresh here, so legislative priorities in red states and blue states are widening the gap. What does this tell us about the future of the country?
Well, it clearly shows that there's a significant divide. But I do think that with the Republican side becoming more extreme only helps Democrats when we start focusing on driving toward working class issues. And it's because of groups like, as he mentioned, One Country has really been the saving grace for me. I tune out the National Democratic Party. I don't even pay attention to the policy decisions. I would tell you that I'm more of a research-based person, outcomes-based person, and doing a needs assessment of the state. And as they say, all politics are local, and so I try to focus on issues that have a direct impact in the local community, in local communities, and specifically to my state, so that the other side doesn't kind of box my members in. Because there are some districts that are on the line that could go either way in any election cycle, particularly in some of our rural communities. And so trying to stay out of the cultural wars as much as possible, but paying attention to what the people are saying, but playing more offense. As Democrats, when you're in a minority, you're taught to play defense. But you got to play some offense to really help to create some deliverables for your constituents. And so I focus on economic issues that really that nobody can disagree with. Child care is one of the issues that I prioritize. We didn't quite get it across the finish line this year, but looking at help for small business, but also starting to communicate in those weekly papers in those rural communities to give an alternative and to play offense from a Democratic standpoint, so that we're not boxed in and branded based upon the negativity that's coming from from the national level, that have boxed us in on issues like defund the police and other things. So I've turned some of those issues around on them, and they have no response. And so they've never been in position to have to govern for a long period of time. And so it's impossible for the other side to really govern. And so they are used to playing from behind. And we've been sort of the party that have been significantly impactful when it comes to governing. But now we have to learn how to play from behind while at the same time providing some solutions to solving problems. Nobody want to hear the kicking and screaming and the partisanship and the bickering going all the time. Yeah, you have to feed the base at some point. But in reality, you got to figure out the common ground an area of common ground for the common good. And that's kind of what I focus a lot on, because I don't have a party infrastructure. So I don't have anyone to fight those battles for me. And so I have to kind of do the aerobic and really set the traps, or play 3D chess, as I say, in order to get some wins from our people, but also stop some bad things from happening or water them down by really offering amendments that are agreed upon, so that we can move forward and keep the process going.
That's great. Zabner, I'm giving you 30 seconds, though.
Yeah. I just think there is a nationalization of our state politics that is really scary. And I hear Senator Hauschild talking about Minnesota. His district is mentioned in every single issue we've talked about. And then I see in Iowa 23, Republicans in the state house who don't have private schools in their district at all, voting to give taxpayer money to private schools. And I don't know how you defend that. And so we're making an effort as a caucus to get out around the state and have these conversations. I'm going to be in Muscatine, Iowa, which is a river town, tonight doing a town hall with our Democratic whip. And I think, in some of these districts, we might be more present than their actual incumbent is. And so making the effort to show up and listen and know this is a long-term struggle. And I just don't think folks want nationalized DC politics, even if they love the caucus. So,
well, this was awesome. Thank you all for joining us today. Terrific discussion. A lot of people I have a lot of respect for, and I want to follow up with after this. Now I'll hand you back to Heidi Heitkamp to introduce the team from Impact Social. And just a reminder to the audience that you'll be returned to the lobby area and can select the Financial Health in Rural America panel from the menu. Thank you very much.